It was given its name by the first president of the United States. In 1789, George Washington established the Department of War. It oversaw the new nation's nascent military with at least 8 conflicts from the Revolutionary War to the Civil War to World War I and World War II. In 1949, the Navy, the Air Force, and the Army were merged, and in a nod to civilian rule of the military, the Department of War became the Department of Defense. Well, this Friday, President Trump is signing an executive order to reclaim the old name. He says Department of War just sounds better. Well, what will the rest of the world hear? The sound of peace through strength, or the drumbeat of more war?
We won the World War I, World War II. It was called the Department of War. We had an unbelievable history of victory when it was Department of War. Then we changed it to Department of Defense.
So maybe next time we're here, my card will read Department of War. We'll see.
We're just going to do it. I'm sure Congress will go along if we need that. I don't think we even need that, but if we need that, I'm sure Congress will go along.
To our viewers watching on PBS in the United States and to all of you around the world, welcome. We begin the day with a renaming and rebranding for the U.S. Department of Defense. With the stroke of his pen, President Trump on Friday awarded the Pentagon an alternative title, its old name, the Department of War. Is it a nod to nostalgia or a message to the world? After a week of power projection by China openly challenging U.S. predominance, is Trump saying the best defense is a strong offense? Well, Trump, who entered the White House calling himself the president of peace, now has a Department of War run by a Secretary of War. At home, Trump and Pete Hegseth are promoting more than a new old name. They're seeking to instill a warrior ethos within the Pentagon. They accuse the department of being too focused on woke ideology, on diversity and equity and inclusion, instead of fighting. Here is what the president said before signing the executive order.
We've been talking about this Department of War. So we won the First World War, we won the Second World War, we won everything before that and in between, and then we decided to go woke and we changed the name to Department of Defense. So we're going Department of War, and I'd like to ask our Secretary of War to say a few words. Pete Hegseth. I think it's a much more appropriate name, especially in light of where the world is right now. We have the strongest military in the world. We have the greatest equipment in the world. We have the greatest manufacturers of equipment by far. There's nobody to even compete. And you see that with this and so many other things. The Patriots are the best. Every element of the military, we make the best by far.
Well, I'm joined now by Tyson Barker. He's a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council here in Berlin. Tyson also worked at the U.S. State Department during the Biden administration. Tyson, it's good to see you again, have you back on the program. I guess the first question on many people's minds is why?
Well, President Trump is a big fan of rebranding things. We've seen this with the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America. We've seen what he has been considering with the Kennedy Center. This is something that he wants to put his stamp on institutions that have existed that are kind of revered in the United States. This does give it a much more, in the Department of Defense, it could give it much more of an aggressive stance. But, the decision to initially change the name to the Department of Defense was both merging the Department of War, which was essentially the Army, with the Navy, and to say that the United States had a global role, that war is something that you mobilize for and demobilize from, which was basically what the United States had done before the end of the Second World War, and to say that, the price of the U.S. global role is eternal vigilance. The defense is something that always needs to be cultivated. And to do this is to say, is this moving towards a more isolationist stance, even as it's projecting more aggressive stance?
When asked whether he would need the approval of Congress, Trump said, we're just going to do it. So, let me ask you, can he just go and do it?
Well, the truth is that this is just one more test of the separation of powers between the three branches of government. That is not classically seen to be the case. That's not seen to be the case legally, but it really depends on the courts as the arbiters of the relationship between Congress and the executive branch. So I would assume that he's just going to move forward with this in a de facto path and to see what would happen in the de jure space. Replacing the names, calling the Secretary of Defense the Secretary of War, etc. But that's up to the courts to decide.
President Trump has repeatedly said that the Pentagon and the military have become too woke, too focused on equity, diversity, and inclusion. He says that the soldiers who took out Osama bin Laden were deployed because they were the best. He says ability is what matters most in life or death military operations. He does have a point, doesn't he?
Well, of course, the operation on Osama bin Laden happened under one of his primary political opponents, even though they never ran against each other, President Obama. But the Department of Defense and the military have long been a space in which the government, the United States, has tried to advance American values in its operations. That includes things like, which happened around the same time of the renaming of the Department of Defense under the Truman administration, desegregation. The Department of Defense, the military, was one of the first places to desegregate, to send a signal in the United States that all Americans have the same rights as citizens. And to see that continue to happen in the military is definitely something that has been part of the post-World War II, contract that both Republicans and Democrats have advanced.
Let me ask you about the Defense Secretary, Pete Hegseth. He will, after today, he will also be called the Secretary of War. He says that this renaming, this rebranding is part of a warrior ethos campaign within the Pentagon. Are you worried about that change of tone?
Well, the word war in the United States and U.S. political discourse has a very evocative meaning. It has often been used to galvanize the public behind specific missions. And that's not just, missions abroad. That can be everything from the war on poverty in the 60s to the war on drugs in the 80s to the war on terror in the aughts. So, this rebranding could say, we are using this as an instrument to advance objectives that the Trump administration sees as important. And that could be both foreign or, frankly, even domestic. And that is worrying.
Well, China, let me ask you about the foreign element here. China, as you know, has been showing off its diplomatic clout and military might, especially this week. And although this renaming, this rebranding has been in the works now for a while, do you think, though, that this is a response to that display of might that we're seeing from China?
President Trump has been no stranger to using bellicose language and bellicose rhetoric as a way of, trying to advance his objectives. The question is always what credibility stands behind that rhetoric. And this could be another example of that. But the facts are the facts. And in the case of China, they have been able to build an alternative alliance system of coalition that involves many, authoritarian countries and strongmen, including perhaps India. And that is clearly a sign of deficiencies in the U.S. current foreign policy approach.
Let me ask you, Tyson, before we run out of time. President Trump entered the White House promising to be the president of peace. Shouldn't he be working to prevent war instead of touting it? Or how do you see it?
He is somebody who, ironically, I think, and this is consistent from his first administration, actually shies away from military engagements. And one of the reasons is because he doesn't want blood on American soldiers' hands abroad. He doesn't want to get, caught in the muck of any kind of foreign military engagement. And that's a product of the fact that he is of the Vietnam generation. That said, his pursuit of the Nobel Peace Prize, for example, is in stark contrast to this kind of very bellicose language that he's using in this rebranding. And frankly, in his domestic policies in cities, which is also a kind of militarization of, U.S. governance domestically.
Tyson Barker, as always, good to talk with you. We appreciate your valuable insights tonight. Thank you.